Hello again, YouTube. I recently just watched the new Batman vs. Superman movie, and I have to say that the plot was much better than I had previously expected. It was really thought out, plot-wise, and they used a lot of material from the actual comic books and movies. However, I don't know if it's just me, but this universe of DC characters seems to be a little off from what most of us are used to. And if you've been a big fan of the more recent DC movies and animations, you might know what I'm talking about. In this video, I'll just touch on a few things concerning the characters of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and especially Lex Luthor. So let's get straight to the point. I have to say that I loved Batman's new suit. It was more original and authentic looking than, say, the Batman from The Dark Knight, though I had gotten used to that high-tech Batman suit. Furthermore, Ben Affleck's voice for Batman wasn't all that, but at least it wasn't the way Christian Bale portrayed him, though I guess one could justify Christian Bale's change in voice by the need to disguise it. I don't know. To be honest, I liked both portrayals of Batman. Another thing is that Batman actually kills in this movie, and he does it a lot without a second thought. If you haven't read much of Batman beyond the cartoon series or the Hollywood movies, you might be confused by the fact that Batman kills people in this movie, and he does so pretty ruthlessly. If you're like me, you probably prefer the Batman who we all grew up to know and love. The kid-friendly Batman who carried similar morals to Superman in his decision not to kill his enemies, or at least try to avoid as many casualties as possible. However, I actually kind of like this Batman. I think his character was pretty cool. I don't like the fact that he has more of a hot-headed temperament and is more instinctive in his actions in this movie than he is in other portrayals of Batman. I liked Batman being the cool-headed and wise man of the Justice League who never allowed his emotions to get the better of him. I think Batman, being a human, however, should face the conflict of having to kill more often, but that's just me. Anyways, despite what you might think, this Batman plays more to the original Batman that people might remember from the late 1930s, who was pretty brutal in dealing with criminals and who had even carried a gun. This Batman, in fact, was taken from the Frank Miller's comic books as opposed to Tim Burton's version of Batman, who most of us know. Even in some DC comics, we see that Batman has felt the need to kill certain individuals, and in Batman Returns, there's even a scene where Batman turns his Batmobile around and blasts the jet engines onto one of Penguin's circus freaks. There's one last point I want to make about Batman, spoiler alert, and that is the fight scene he has where he sees himself in an alternative universe, or in the future, or in a dream, where we're not exactly sure yet. In this scene, his concerns about Superman are finally realized. He sees a rotting world where Superman has an authoritarian-like rule and is killing or capturing rebels. Anyways, we see Batman get out of a cellar and is later betrayed by some of his soldiers and allies. In this scene, there is a fight that looks too unrealistic where Batman is pretty much beating up a bunch of guys with guns. Instead of shooting at Batman, the guys all look like they were all just running towards him to be pummeled by him. They could have made the scene look more realistic like other fight scenes, but maybe the soldiers were ordered by Superman to keep him alive, or maybe those who betrayed him just didn't want to kill Batman, or it was all just a dream. We'll have to find out next time on Dragon Ball Z. I mean, the next Justice League movie that might come out. Anyways, that's enough about Batman. Let's move on to Superman's character. To start with, I already didn't like the actor's look for Superman in The Man of Steel. I just don't think anyone could look or portray themselves as Superman like Christopher Reeves did. The guy made the character iconic. Much like what we saw in The Man of Steel, we see Superman tearing through buildings and objects without concern for the citizens around him. In fact, this was part of the whole conflict or basis of the movie. It was centered on Superman's recklessness and the collateral damage that took place in his fights, especially with alien invaders, which brought devastation to cities and people alike. This is very unlike Superman because we all know that Superman is very sympathetic and would try to avoid injury to anyone, even postponing a fight to save a stranger who was caught up in the action. He also kind of faces the Goku dilemma, where being too powerful of a character leads him to attracting more powerful opponents, which puts the whole world at risk. Batman, seeing Superman's actions as being unpredictable and reckless, led him to fear his possible intentions and his potential capacity to turn on mankind. That's enough of spoiling the plot and character of Superman and Batman, so let's move on to talking about the most terrible character in this movie, and that is none other than Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. The guy represented Lex Luthor just terribly. He was more like a Joker character than he was a Lex Luthor. I don't really blame his acting, it just wasn't a fitting role for him. He gave me the impression of a wimpy high school nerd who has a grudge against the world. But if you would remember, in other shows, Lex actually saw Superman the same way Bats did in this movie, and that was that Superman was a threat to humanity. I doubt even Lex would, spoiler alert, release Doomsday on the world like this little egotistical maniac did. However, I could be wrong. Anyways, when I first saw him, I got the impression that he was an amateur scientist who just worked for Lex, not that he was Lex himself. Furthermore, he looked a lot younger than either Superman or Batman, and as far as I can remember, Lex was about the same age, or even older. When he'd talk, if you weren't paying attention, it sounded like he was speaking gibberish. He also didn't have the presence or demeanor of a classic Lex. Lex was more charismatic in his demeanor and demanded respect. People actually feared and revered him. Lastly, I want to quickly hit on Wonder Woman, the Amazon Princess Diana. There was very little we saw of her in this movie, but from what we did see, we can tell that there were very stark differences between how she was portrayed in this movie as opposed to other portrayals of her in cartoons and comics. She had more of the demeanor of the Wonder Woman we saw in the 1975 TV show, who became well acquainted with society and was able to fit in much like Superman did. In this movie, it seems like she was already well accustomed to behaving like your average American woman, while I'm more used to seeing her as the Amazon woman who stood out like a sore thumb with her tough girl attitude, distinct dialect, and outspoken/blatant demeanor. Now, I don't want to give up too much about the movie than I already did, which I already pretty much covered everything, so I don't see why I should bother stopping now. Anyways, I just want to hit on some of the costume designs of our superheroes, especially Wonder Woman's and Superman's super suits. For example, in this movie, Wonder Woman's supersuit looks too archaic for my taste. It was a little duller than I'm used to. I wanted a more flashier and vibrant colored outfit for her. I think Superman's outfit shares the same problems. I prefer a little brighter colored suit without the obvious little sewing marks on them. I don't know, I guess the ideal looking outfit is more of a subjective issue unless you want to compare their suits on this movie with the ones they wore in comic books and other movies. Well, that's the end of my review. I'd rate this movie an 8 out of 10, but I guess the fact that I watched it in an IMAX theater made all the difference. If you haven't watched it, ignore all the hate and go out there and judge it for yourself. This movie was actually good, and I had to actually think of the flaws that were made in this movie for me to address it appropriately. The thing about DC movies and series is that writers can mess around with stuff and the fans don't really mind. They just want to see more of it, and they want it to stay at least kind of consistent. So thanks for watching, and talk to you guys next time.